Okay, there's been an update to the lawsuit with Suno and Udio, specifically around Suno when it comes to the big three labels, Sony, Warner, and Universal. I want to talk about that a little bit, give you the update, and get your conversations going around what you think's going on. Cool, welcome back. Now, for the record, I am AI DIY, the AI music guy. I'm Matt. I'm not a lawyer. Any sort of legal experience has not been around the music industry. I don't claim to be. There are lawyers out there. There's one in particular that seems to talk a lot about AI and music, and she's, fantastic in what she does. This is for a conversation. I take a lot of interest in this that's going on, particularly because it impacts the community that I support, but it's also super interesting. I'm learning so much about copyright and just the legal battle around, AI and all this stuff that's going on right now. So what's happening? So the big three have gone in and said, Suno, you have basically scraped all your music off of YouTube, or at least some of it, whatever. And although you have been claiming fair use in the use of AI and the use of music when it comes to everything before, scraping things off YouTube is a complete violation. It's wonderful. You can't claim fair use. It's a violation of the terms, and that's where we got you now. That is known as a DMCA, anti-circumvention violation, and that's serious because copyright fights can drag on forever in the weeds, and if it's fair use. But if it's DMCA, that's more black and white. If you bypass encryption, you're in violation, period. And it's in complete violation of the terms of YouTube, and they can get you for that. So basically overnight, the conversation went from, is training fair use, to these guys are pirates. And that's way nastier, and it grabs the headlines a lot more. But then this is where I basically spent a day and a half just going crazy, asking questions, being curious, and just wanting to put it out to the community, right? So this is basically where it starts to get murky. Suno knows if it's scraped YouTube or not. They know exactly what data they use, but the labels they don't. And this is basically the twist here, right? Even if Suno did use YouTube, the labels don't know whether that was or without Google's permission. That's the wild card. Because, imagine this, right? If Suno actually had some kind of quiet deal with YouTube/Google, I'm not saying they do, I don't know, but if they did, the piracy claim collapses. Suddenly it's not piracy at all, it's licensed data. Possibly. I don't know, if it goes on to whether the people that put it up on YouTube have to have a say in it. I don't know. It could be another open letter to independent artists. Who knows? And would Google have possibly told the labels? Probably not. Google's not in the business of handing out inside info. They sit back, keep their mouth shut, and really only get involved if a judge drags them into discovery. So basically, what does that mean? It means the labels might be firing the shot blind. They're raising the claim of piracy without knowing for sure. And that's a pretty clever strategy because it forces Suno into a bind. At the moment, they're in the process of the legal battle with the labels, and the labels have basically offered them a settlement. Come to terms, and we want to have say in what's done around the place, and we want to have a minority stake. Yeah, so if they're claiming this thing now about possibly scraping off YouTube, it's a pretty good strategy, right? It forces Suno into a bind. They can either settle now or open the books and prove the data that they actually used. And here's a wild possibility. What if Suno actually does have a deal with Google? Suddenly this whole piracy claim is a red herring. The labels think they're chasing a pirate ship, but really they're shadowboxing with Google behind the curtain. And that would explain a lot. Why YouTube hasn't sued. If they know what's going on, or if this is all brought to the forefront, this is what the labels are claiming. Why hasn't YouTube sued? Why hasn't Google sued? Why has this claim only showed up 15 months into the case? Maybe the labels are just overplaying their hand. Let me add this. I was actually at Suno's head office this month. I didn't get any inside information. I just made some observations. We didn't even discuss the lawsuit at all, other than me, saying the lawsuit's interesting, but there was nothing that sort of came back. In September this month, I basically was at the Suno studios for a presentation. I got a tour by the person who invited me, and one thing that really stuck out, Suno's in classic startup mode. Fanciest thing they have in the office is this water cooler. It's awesome. You can pick your own flavor, cucumber, lemon, whatever. I don't know. I just had regular water. And the rest of the office, it's pretty basic. No gold-plated bean bags, fancy espresso robots, cleaning machines. To me, that's a classic sign of a company that's looking after investor money and not being wasteful. And here's another angle that makes me suspicious of this whole piracy angle or claim. Suno raised over $100 million last year with big name venture firms like Lightspeed, Matrix, the founder of Collective, all on board. These aren't casual investors. They've got entire teams of lawyers and analysts whose job is to sniff out legal risks. If Suno was really running some giant YouTube scraping operation, that would have lit up like a red flag in the due diligence. No way those firms would drop that kind of money if they thought one DMCA notice from Google could kill the company. And that adds to my own gut check. I've been in the Suno office. It's a bunch of young engineers and UI devs building features and shipping product. They're not running some covert piracy lab. For them to have scraped YouTube, it wouldn't be some sort of side project. Leadership would have had to direct order engineers to break encryption. Honestly, it doesn't fit the vibe of what I saw. So let's just talk quickly about specifics about what was offered as a settlement, right? So Suno and Udio were offered the deal, pay us some money, not just to pay us money and we'll walk away. It was licensing fees, control over how the AI can be used. And the big thing was like a minority stake in the company. So I did a bit about it not too long ago. And that was the interesting part, right? It was like, so imagine you're at Suno. You're thinking, do I really want Sony or Warner owning part of my startup? They would hesitate, and then boom, they're hit with a piracy claim. Suddenly those settlement terms don't look so bad anymore, do they? It's like labels just slid the poker chips across the table and said, call or fold, B-word, we want to move on with this. But here's the counterpoint that bothers me. If the labels really do take equity in Suno, isn't that risky as hell? Like, if Suno did scrape YouTube, then that shiny minority stake is basically a time bomb. You're like betting on a company Google could stomp tomorrow. So what's the benefit of the minority stake? You're basically damaging your stake. And doesn't that bring Google into the picture? If YouTube's terms of service were violated, then Google might want to step in, either to patch their systems, sue, or maybe even demand their own cut. And suddenly the label's little equity deal is sitting on a fault line. So maybe this is why Suno's reluctant to hand out equity at all. Like, it just seemed like so obvious before you can make it go away. Because once you give a slice to the labels, then you have to give one to Google, maybe one to the other rights holders. And before you know it, you're carving up your company just to survive. And it's funny, right? Because we've all watched like the Shark Tank. You sit there on a couch watching some nervous founder argue over whether to give up 10% or 15%, and you're like yelling at the TV, or at least you're thinking, for crying out loud, just give them the 15%. It's no big deal. You're going to be rich. But here's the thing. It actually is a big deal. That extra 5%, that's control. That's delusion. It changes who has a say at the table, especially if a lot of people get involved. And then it's not even a minority stake anymore. And in Suno's case, it may not even be possible to just give up 10 or 15%. Remember how I talked about how they have investors and they raised over $100 million? Like I said, I did a video about it. Those early investors weren't just putting that money in for fun. They played the long game, but not a long game where the company keeps slicing itself thinner and thinner every time a new threat shows up and more people have a say at the table. So like when you hear about Sony maybe wanting a stake, then Warner, then maybe Google down the line, it's not just carving little harmless pieces. Each slice chips away at independence, but it also stretches out the investor's timeline. And investors hate it when the finish line keeps moving. Startups only get carved up so many times before the founders aren't really running it anymore. They're just employees at their own company. And here's what has me scratching my head, right? Why bring this up now? We're 15 months into the case. If Suno really was ripping YouTube, wouldn't you lead in with that at day one? And even like months ago, there was a famous case that just got settled because the AI was scraping data illegally. It was like $1.5 billion or whatever that was done. So why not raise it then? And that like makes me wonder, like, is this partially a bluff? Like they couldn't know for sure unless it was brought up by YouTube or Google, rather, like if they told them directly, but then why wouldn't Google be included in the lawsuit? Not necessarily baseless, but it sort of seems strategically timed. And I sort of think about it like, wouldn't adding these new claims hurt settlement chances? Like, no, it actually helps labels. It raises the stakes and makes Suno more likely to settle on their terms. But then doesn't it tank the value of their equity if they really still want in? Yeah, it does. That's the irony here. But also they're in with Udio as well. And Udio's not having this claimed against them, so who knows? Did Suno actually scrape YouTube? That's what they allege. It would violate the terms of service and the DMCA, but notice YouTube itself hasn't sued. Google hasn't sued, and they haven't not come in on this. Could it all be a bluff? Yep. The timing's suspicious. We've given you time to go on the settlement. Here, we're going to turn up the knob on the pressure. If it had merit, why didn't they bring it in sooner? That's the question. Either they only just pieced it together, or they sat on it to drop it at maximum leverage. And what could Suno's counter movie, because that's the thing. And mind you, this is all me with a sci-fi brain getting excited about things and asking questions. They've got a few options. They could attack the timing. Why drop this now, 15 months in? They could make the labels prove it, which sounds strong, but there's a risk. The minute you say prove it, the labels get to go digging into discovery. That means handing over logs, training data, maybe even emails. If there's anything sketchy in there, it's game over. But if Suno hasn't done it, or they did it with Google's permission, then that strategy could actually work in Suno's favor. It could expose the claim as frivolous, or at least show that labels are swinging wildly without any real proof. On top of that, Suno could argue the labels don't even have the right to enforce YouTube's encryption in the first place. And that's really suspicious for me too. At worst case, they could drag Google into court and say, you tell us if circumvention really happened. Like, you show us. I guess that could be part of discovery too. Could Suno actually sue for defamation? No, court filings are protected by litigation privilege. Outside of court, maybe they could push back rhetorically, but defamation's basically off the table. You have to be able to bring legal arguments into court and use whatever language possible. And that could be another reason why the labels are bringing this forward, because they can use whatever that language they want and sort of cause reputational damage with the threat of more reputational damage and saying, come on, settle, come to the table. And I just want to bring up that Anthropic case that I sort of alluded to before. It's not happening in a vacuum. They got sued by authors for using pirated books to train their model. The judge in that case said if you bought the books legally, training on them is fair use. But if you stored pirated books in a big central library, that's not fair use. And this is the difference. Anthropic ended up settling, like I said, for $1.5 billion. And it's one of the biggest copyright settlements in US history. So now the labels are looking at Suno and going, perfect. They did with music what Anthropic did with books. Let's use the exact same playbook. But it's not YouTube and Google going after, right? So I don't know if there's more to this. So here's my read. The piracy claim might be legit, or it might be a bluff. Either way, it changes the game. If it's real, the danger to Suno is real. If it's a bluff, it's brilliant because it makes a settlement look like the safe exit. But it's a stupid bluff if Suno didn't do it at all because they know that they didn't do it. So it's just a bluff. And I suppose even in bluffing, if they say they didn't do it, they could still have to go to discovery, I suppose. But if the labels really wanted equity, this move undercuts their own position. It drags Google into the shadows and makes that equity look toxic. And it makes me think maybe the equity offer is already off the table. Maybe the labels have shifted back to plan A, destroy Suno, and use the rubble as a warning to every AI music startup. And I've done this comparison before when we're talking about the initial downloading of music back with, let's just say, LimeWire and the other ones that are out there. So what do you guys think? Do you think Suno did pirate the music through YouTube? Are the labels just playing poker, trying to scare them into the deal? Don't forget, this doesn't mention anything with Udio, so they could destroy Suno and still have a piece of Udio. I don't know. And before we wrap this up, I want to thank my AI DIY consultant, Scott Dunlap, who is formerly of Universal Music, who brought this to me and just led me down this rabbit hole. Like I said, I spent like a day and a half just going through with a mind screw. After I record this, I'm probably going to be still thinking of all sorts of things that could possibly be a playbook and poker playing and does this do this? Does this mean that? But thanks, Scott, for bringing that to my attention. Definitely discuss down in the comments below. Remember, I'm not a lawyer. This is just an interesting legal fight in the space that I'm in. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.